Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
And my name is Dan.
and we are back to review the Game Week 22 action. There's been a lot going on recently, but we are back to talk about the various bits of action after a bit of a strange game week, but an important game week. Lots of boosts played, some interesting team news, which we'll come on to. Yeah, so looking forward to getting back and talking about it. First things first, Dan, how are you?
Yeah, not bad, Angus. Luton somehow won. Oh, terrible quality game, but I'll take that. Um, Last couple of weeks, Gaffr gone a bit downhill. Um, Dropped outside the top 100, but I'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, overall, a couple of days before Christmas, it's sort of calmed down a little bit. Lots of football over Christmas period, and that means a lot of deadlines to keep up with.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think at the weekend, I think it was on Saturday, there were multiple different deadlines, and trying to I had to sort of keep tracking in my head, like, okay, when's the Scottish deadline? When's the Super League deadline? Which one's first? Like, um.
At least all the games are on the same days, so
Yeah, I
for
mean
me
it's
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 pretty
it's
easier
potentially
from
going to
that
be
side.
frantic for people on Boxing Day. I think we get 20 of the teams. Um, that's the sort of with half an hour to then change anything in your team. It's not right or anything. Or if you're waiting for certain players, like it's handy. I mean, it would be helpful if that. I mean, Leeds are one of the four teams we don't get, and I think Leeds are a team that a lot of people would want to have the lineup
Yeah,
this week. So that's obviously the slight pain, but yeah, that team news is certainly going to be helpful this week. Um, but yeah, so we'll get a bit into sort of how we did this week. It wasn't a great week for me, Red Arrow. Um, a lot of people have seen my bench issue, which is sort of my headline of this week. Callum Lang on the bench for 26 points. Which, given that after a -4, my team scored a net of 47 points, could really have done with those 26 points. I had Palmer in goal for 6, Beck 1, Johnson 6, Timon 7, Burrows 6, Nonto vice captain for 1, Dan James 11, Azaz captain for 4, Doak for 1, Hamer for 3, Piero for 5. Um, yeah, I think there was a brief moment of hope, and then I was like, it's not going to happen when Beck and Nonto were both on the bench after Lang had hauled, and dutifully it did not last. But yeah, so a bit of Red Arrow. It's gone a little bit downhill recently, but we'll talk about. I mean, I bought in Beck and Dan James this week. Dan James obviously went to plan, and as we'll talk about in a bit, Beck is going to be a handy one to have going forward, certainly. So, yeah, not ideal. I was expecting a red arrow this week, knowing that quite a few people were still going ahead with sort of playing things like follow the leader, but it's hard not to look at that 26 pointer on the bench and sort of feel a particular way about the game week. But yeah,
I,
on to the
don't,
next one. It will be Boxing Day football.
I don't think I've ever had a player score that high on the bench.
I think I've had like maybe once before, but like, yeah,
That's ridiculous. Just every time he shot, it
yeah,
basically went in. We'll get into it.
yeah. We will definitely talk about it. We're gonna relive my pain, but yeah, couldn't quite believe it. Probably gonna bench him again this week as well. Oh. But yeah, that's me. How did you do this week, Dan?
Well, I got 48. I rolled my transfer, so I've got two frees for next week. Nardi in goal for 4, Timon 7, Van Eric 0, Burrow 6. I vice captained Nonto. For one. I captained Azaz for four. Signs two. Mason Clark for six. The week before, he scored very well. He set up. Um, got an assist this week early on. I thought he was going to get another haul, but that didn't happen. Piero five, Conway two, and not only did Colton Morris win the game for me, within that shot he managed to score a goal and get top bonus. So a nice little 11 for Morris. Um, I had Joe Bryan on the bench, was a bit annoying. He got 9 points. Um, but yeah, a red arrow down to 128. I think in the last 2 weeks I've dropped about 40 maybe 50 places, but I've not played any boosts, and I've just had a couple of uh, like I didn't the week before this week I didn't have any Sheffield United attackers like Haim or anything. This week I don't have a Leeds that's well Bogle, so things like that. But yeah, overall I'm sitting in an okay position. Um, just got to start building towards the boost now.
Yeah, that's obviously the next thing, which I can't remember if there's any questions about, but I'm sure we'll talk about even over the next couple of weeks as we get closer and closer to the doubles. So that's sort of how we did this week. Next thing is back to you for the team news.
Yeah, a bit of fantasy relevant team news. Derby played a back three. Elder was left wing back. Mendes Lang and Harness dropped to the bench. For Hull, 4-3-3. Giles at left back. Longman, Kamara as wingers. Palmer as the 10. Pedro up front. Pompey, 4-2-3-1. Murphy, Lang, Ritchie were behind Bishop. Burnley, Perez was benched again. I'm not sure if that's news at this point, but he's benched. Watford and Gaffy's been playing right back, which is annoying. Over Andrews. For Sheffield United, Moore's up front. Leeds, Nonto was benched. Um, for Millwall, Brian was left back. Aziz, Eze, and Amakwa were behind Langstaff. Blackburn, Camwell was back in. Beck was on the bench. Borough, no Ailing. Conway started. Lath was on the bench. Sunderland, Hume was benched. West Brom, Mikey Johnson was in for Grant. And Bristol City, Wells not in the squad. May Lulu up front. So yeah, some relevant team news moving forward. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's the Leeds one that's costing us a few headaches. Nonto keeps getting benched in like the really good games. It's very annoying.
Yeah, and it was like the weirdest one was his last benching. Farkas said it was because I think it was the game before or two games before the deadline for five yellows, and Nonto was on four yellows. He'd been on four yellows for a little while, but if that was the reason for leaving him out, why do you then bring him off the bench? So, like in that game, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. It's a little bit annoying. Um, so yeah, we'll see how that goes, but I think yeah,
He
it's
probably plays this week because he's
yeah.
had his rest. So yeah, it's a bit frustrating, especially with players who played follow the leader with Leeds. That's very annoying. Are you doing your
Yes.
first game first, Angus?
Hmm?
Are you
Yeah,
doing your game first?
yeah, why not? So obviously we're going to talk about a few games. I was just trying to work out which games they were, but I'm going to talk about the goal fest that was Plymouth 3, Middlesbrough 3. Um, a wild game. I think Plymouth took the lead multiple times, couldn't win. I think they were in the lead every time, and Borough equalised three times, including my favourite thing where I think after the second and third goals, Plymouth weren't in the lead for more than 5 minutes. Um, but yeah, I mean, Gibson opened the scoring for Plymouth. Um, and then just after half time, Johnny Howson equalised. So, and I'm just sort of double checking now. Yeah, it was a Johnny Howson unassisted goal. So for all the Middlesbrough ownership, and I think they were another one on Follow the Leader this week. A Johnny Howson unassisted goal. About as bad as it gets. Uh, Darko JB put them back in front with a Bundu assist. Then Hayden Hackney unassisted goal. Because if a Johnny Howson unassisted goal wasn't bad enough, it's then Hackney for the second. Bundu then gets the third with an assist from Ogbeta, and then Latelaf off the bench. I know a few people had him on that played follow the leader, so you've at least got something there. And then just the perfect sort of cap off for a lot of people was Ben Doak managing to get himself booked in the 96th minute. Um, Disappointing one for Borough. Obviously, Plymouth still managed to sort of pick up points at home. Um, if they're going to stand any chance of staying up, we've said all along it's going to come down to them picking up points at home. And they're gonna produce results like this. They have, you know, for the year and a half they've been in the championship. Um, and I think the problem for Borough, I mean, as much as you could say is going behind three times at Plymouth, like, you've done well to get a point in those circumstances, but it's obviously a real issue that you go behind three times. From a fantasy point of view, of course, as Zaz blanks, Doak blanks, uh, Conway blanks for anyone with him. Latte has the goal off the bench, of course. Um, Ailing, I mean, he was a major doubt, didn't play. Um, Dyke deal would have looked like a decent option, or Borges. Then Borough concede three goals. So probably a little bit of frustration there. Um, but yeah, just a strange game. Um, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be sort of panicking about your Borough assets at this point, but I don't know what your thoughts are on these two teams really. But let's talk about Borough first.
Yeah, so I think over the last couple of months, Borough have scored quite a lot of goals. They've been great aims. I've got Azaz and Conway. Azaz, I think he's not going anywhere for me at the minute. He might go later on if I'm planning for like a follow leader or something, but I'm keeping him. Conway and Latte Laugh, they just sharing minutes. It's very frustrating. Um, like we've seen that they basically just rotate, or sometimes they'll both play. Um, you then have the thing where on numerous times the player who's been on the bench comes on and gets more points than the player that starts. It's just a bit, it's just a bit of a nightmare. So um, you sort of want to buy the ticket to the raffle, but it could be like a haul, or it could just be nothing, and that's frustrating. You can't really put an armband on them either. Um, so yeah, I think moving forward, Conway might be a sell. Um, Defensively, I haven't had Ayling. He's probably the only one I would go to. You've had Doak Angus. He's done fairly well. Are you looking to keep him, or are you with the boost coming up? Is he going to be one of the players you sacrifice?
Yeah, so I think he'll be a sacrifice for me at some point coming up. I think there's a number of midfielders from the teams that double that are options, and he feels like a relatively sort of easy one to sell. He's obviously got the potential in him. I've had some nice returns from him, but there's also a lot of low scores in there. Um, I think a lot of the lower scores came as more people bought him, so I'm blaming everyone else, given that I had him before everyone else. It's one of the few players that I can actually blame everyone else for. um, but yeah, I think particularly with looking ahead to the doubles, looking to maximise the boosts, particularly in 26. I think he is one that will probably go for me at some point. I was half tempted around Dyke Steel, particularly once I saw Ayling was injured, but didn't go there. I think people who've gone Borges, I think that's fine because I think he's still going to be the starter. He'd taken Engels' place even before Engels' injury, so I think he will remain first choice. Obviously, you have to be prepared that at some point there will probably be a game he misses, just for rotation purposes. Now that Engel is back, but yeah, I think particularly ahead of the double. Doak will probably be one that's a sacrifice for me.
And moving on to Plymouth, they obviously are one of the teams that double in 26. The fixtures leading up to it aren't terrible either. Have you considered Plymouth or any of their assets? But maybe like a triple. Would you go there?
It's not for me. We talked
No.
before about like they probably have one of the better doubles, which is the sort of complicating factor there. But there's a bit of rotation. There's a bit of who you would go for. Like I think for people who have Grimshaw, he's a great one to have for the double. Like particularly if you're looking at something like follow the leader in the double to have sort of like your other teams to base it around, and Grimshaw as an extra player, something like that. If you really wanted to go for them, I think, like I say, they have one of the better doubles, but I think it feels quite tough to work out who you'd go for at this point. Do you sort of feel similar on that?
Yeah, I think so. Like this, Plymouth wouldn't be like a massive surprise if you get to the double and they like a few of their players score well. But even someone like Morgan Whittaker, like he's currently out injured, he would like be your go-to man. I do have Grimshaw, but I'm not even sure if I'm going to play it on Plymouth. Um, like you said, the rotation. Like sometimes Hardy starts up front. They started up Femi up front, Andre Gray up front. Um, yeah, they're all over the place. Who do they play at fullback? Sometimes they play wing backs. It's just it's just a bit of a nightmare all over the place. But um, yeah, the only way I might consider is if like Whitaker was back playing. You get Whitaker. I've got Grimshaw, and then maybe you just take a massive flyer on some. But yeah, um, I don't think I'll be doing it with Plymouth. I say that now, but I could do.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of like not panic on Borough, like you know, the, you still got the options there. Plymouth, have a look, see if there's anything you like ahead of the double, but yeah, it's not ideal. What's the first game you want to talk about though, Dan?
So I managed to watch the Portsmouth Coventry game. I had, as I mentioned, Mason Clark and Van Eyck. So having Portsmouth got bad the week before and Coventry scored a few goals, I was looking forward for massive hauls in this. And that was definitely the case after, I think it was the third minute when Bassett scored a good goal on the counter from a Mason Clark assist. I think a few minutes later, Bassett got played clean through. I think he has to go round the goalie. Um, he made it easier for the goalie and hit it straight at him. And then it sort of the Lang show, 4 goals, um, some good finishes. You got assists from Bishop and Potts. Um, we've sort of mentioned Lang a few times throughout. I think a few people have gone there. I know you've gone there. When I watched Luton play, Lang was probably their best player when I saw them live. Um, they do have options, and I can see people. They might be fairly popular. I'm not 100% sure with the double. Um, Angus, you've got Lang. Are you surely you're keeping him for the double? They
Yeah,
do.
yeah, you've got to. I mean, I've kept him all the way through. He'll stay. Like I said, I'll probably mention him again this week. Um, if Coventry had a decent goalkeeper, he probably only scores a couple in that game,
Yeah.
but which is the other side of it. But yeah, I mean, aside from sort of the pain this weekend, I'm not sort of looking at moving him on at all at this moment.
Are you worried though with the double because like it is? I know it's a double, but it is Sunderland away and Blackburn away. Like they are two top. I think they're top six. I think Blackburn are in the playoffs. Blackburn definitely have a
Just
decent
outside, I
form.
think, are they, or are they in
Yeah, I know they're up there. I can't remember if the West Brom.
fifth? Yeah, they are fifth.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't like. You watch the game they win 4-1, and you think, oh yeah, I can triple up on Portsmouth. I'm not convinced, although I do think they do have options throughout the team. Lang is is obviously an option. You've got Bishop, who on another day gets more points, who is the main number nine in the team, scored a lot of goals from last year. Um, Murphy's had returns throughout the season. Richie, whether he'll be able to play both games in the double, but he does have, I know he's getting on a bit, but he does have that quality that from set pieces and things like that. And then as a defender Ogilvy, um, he was a constant threat. I don't know if it was just this game, Coventry defending poorly from like set pieces, but he seemed to get on the end of a few. So, which players do you think you'd go for if you were playing like a follow the leader? Obviously, Lang. Would you go Lang and Bishop?
I think it's possible. I think particularly depending on how it shakes out for the double, like a lot of people will be looking at midfielders. You know, we talk about Blackburn, we talk about Watford. You know, that's those teams are that's midfielders. Um, I mean, obviously there's Bayo there, but in terms of some of these teams,
Yeah,
it's looking at midfielders. So there is the option of going in there. I think if I were looking at three, it's not the first game in terms of noticing Ogilvy being a threat at set pieces. He's grabbed a couple of goals by sort of being in and about it from set pieces this season. Um, I think I'd probably look at him, Murphy, and one of Lang or Bishop. I think that's
yeah.
probably where I'd be at this point.
I think what will be interesting is because Lang's got this 4 goals. I wonder if he'll get all the attention where Bishop might actually end up being the player that scores more in the double. I think I'd go Bishop if I was planning it now. Coventry, Lampard's had a very stable start. Like I don't think they've quite had the bounce that they thought they would or wanted. Um, I think you can sort of see the formation he wants to play. It's definitely helped Mason Clark become an option. I jumped on him last week and um, that worked out. Um, but they had like 3 really good games. They've still got one more game against Plymouth, and then they go, I suppose, Millwall at home and Cardiff aren't terrible, but I think I'll be getting off them pretty quickly after the Plymouth game.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and I think there's options there. We talked about Ogilvy, we talked about Murphy, Ritchie, Lang, Bishop, even the keeper. To be honest, I think he had a couple of decent moments in there as well, and so I do think some people will already be on him, some people will go to him, and I think that's fine too. Um, and the fact that they have the second double, um, probably helps, but I think it's just where exactly people want to go, and it might be shaped by who you want to get rid of in terms of what position they are, etc. I think it might even just come down to something as simple as that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's enough on that game. Talked
yeah,
about
it's
Portsmouth.
a bit of a weird one. So I went back and forth quite a lot about what other game I was going to talk about. Um, but I'm going to talk about Burnley against Watford, in part because there's a little bit around Burnley in terms of like, oh, I mean, Egan Riley, just as soon as Parker confirmed he was injured, was back in the lineup. Um, Estev stayed in. But obviously, partially looking ahead at Watford, partially talking about Burnley. Personally, I think there's a question mark about the assist for the first goal. Brownhill crosses it in. It sure looks like it's a cross that's looking for Fleming that takes a nick off the Watford defender and diverts to Anthony. But he's been given the assist, so um, not much you can do there. Um, and then he also scores later on in what was a good finish. Watford got one back with Bar. I think Watford will be one that a lot of people are looking at. They have obviously a good run of fixtures, culminating in a double. Um, and so I think it's mainly using it to talk about Watford. Burnley are fine. Burnley, you've got whatever you've got. Perez, it's the questions. He's going to be great when he plays, but there's going to be plenty of benchings in there. Roberts, perfectly fine. Egan Riley, for those of us who have him cheaper, defender, starting regularly. Um, so Anthony has looked good. Brownhill, we'll have some games where he returns. Fleming still playing up front, but whatever you've got, you're probably fine with. Like, don't think that changes much. Watford, obviously, this was always going to be a tough game, and I think you know I don't sort of put too much stock in terms of oh now I'm put off Watford because of that game. I think the sort of frustration for me is Ryan Andrews is one I would have looked at, and Gaki has come into the team and started the last couple. You have Larousse who's come in at left back. You sort of have Vata who came into the team and did decently, but then came off at half time in this game. Um, Bayo, I think, would still be a decent option. Chak for Tadze as well, obviously. I think was in the bonus despite being on the losing side, so it shows that he's still ticking along very nicely. Um, Bart gets the goal. I think they're one that are going to get a lot of attention at this moment. We talked about them briefly before recording, but I think Chak Fatadze, I think obviously a lot of people jumped on after I bigged him up last time and with mixed results. I think he's another one that people are going to look at. Bayo, I think quite a few people still own Bayo from going on him. And particularly with that run coming up, I don't think he's going anywhere. Um, After that is where I think it gets a little bit dicey. As I say, particularly with Andrews having dropped out of the team. What are your feelings on sort of Watford assets at this point?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think there's two clear ones, check for Tadsy, and especially if you're building a follow the leader, there's not many teams, as we mentioned, have a striker you might want to go with, apart from probably Portsmouth. So getting Bayer makes a lot of sense. He's been ticking over quite fairly nicely. Um, Obviously, he had that crazy game where he got 4 goals against Sheffield Wednesday, but since then he's got one, two, three, four in about 6 games. So he's taken along nicely, and in the double, you'd expect him to probably return. The third one is really tricky. Um, I think you probably would like to punt on either fullback, but I think I'm going to wait until close to the time just to make sure no one drops out, is rotated, or anything like that. Um, yeah, I don't know about Vatter and Bar. They seem to come in and out of the team quite a lot. Um, yeah, definitely Bayo and Chapman Hasley, but yeah, the third one's probably a wait and see at the minute.
Yeah, I think it's one of those awkward ones, particularly like say, Andrew's not in, Vata, who I like, sort of, you know, want to make sure after the substitution at half time at the weekend, sort of like and Gakia, unfortunately, one of these players who, gets injured quite a lot. Particularly if you're future planning, is he still gonna, is he gonna get through the next 4 weeks? Is it equally, will he play 2 games? Sort of. I mean, I guess
Yeah, that's
this double is further apart, I think, but like, will he play that many games? Like, I think is sort of the question. Um, so it might come down to it that when it actually comes around, I just go safe with like Pollock or Porteous. Um, but I'm sort of going to work out exactly how it shakes out for me. But I think, come the double, I would probably have Chakvetadze and Bayo.
yeah, yeah.
Um, did you have another game you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Leeds or Oxford. Um, Briefly about Leeds, but probably focus more on Oxford, especially within the management news. We've not really mentioned that since our last pod. Um, Obviously, Leeds won 4-0. I think it was pretty routine. As we mentioned, numerous occasion, whoever plays in that front four, when they're on it, especially at home, they're very hard to stop. Um, so the front four was James, Harrison, Solomon, and Piero. Um, just just players like Nonto, Ramazani, and Joseph on the bench. Um, you had the 2 goals and assists for Manor Solomon. You had a goal and assist for Harrison. You got a goal from James, assist for Piero. Bogle, who a lot of people own, got a goal as well and a clean sheet. So it's just points everywhere. Um, you obviously have Dan James. Do you have Nonto as well?
Yeah,
You do. Um, I've got Nonto and Piero. So I've had like the 2 players who got the lowest scoring, really. Um, but yeah, like I mentioned, this isn't really about Leeds. They've got fairly nice games coming forward. I think they've got Stoke at the weekend who are giving up loads of shots. Um, they've then got Derby, Blackburn, Hull. It's quite a nice run over the Christmas period. So um, yeah, I don't. If you've got assets, I think you probably keep them. Anything on Leeds, Angus? We've mentioned it quite a lot. Near enough every episode we talk about Leeds and that front four. But
yeah. I mean, I think you've got the sort of attacking rotation element, which is biting at the moment. Aronson plays basically every game. Dan James, I think when he's been available, has played basically every game, which is part of the reason I also went with him um, this week. Um, Nonto, it's been a bit stranger, but he's also the top scorer from them in terms of points. Piero is sort of picked over, and so I think they're still decent. Bogle, the main one. Strauch obviously is a decent option, but obviously missed out this weekend. I think you're not necessarily too concerned with Leeds at this point. Um, and yeah, I mean, unless you have a particular thing you're wanting to switch around, or you just don't want to deal with the rotation, for example, or whatever, like that's fine. But I wouldn't sort of be rushing to get rid, particularly if you think there's a chance that they're going to play against Stoke.
yeah, that's fair. Oxford wise, I'm not sure you can read too much in this. This is probably the hardest game they're going to have this season. Um, we did have the news of Des Buckingham being sacked, Gary Rowett coming in. Angus, what do you think about that? I quite like the appointment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's those two parts. Don't really like getting rid of Des Buckingham, but if you're going to get rid of him, particularly if it's short-term desire to, solidify things or whatever exactly you're thinking, I think Gary Rout's decent. Um,
Yeah.
I think he's probably been miscast with a couple of these higher up the table teams. But I think for a lower end team to try, particularly if you're trying to be more solid, trying to get what you can get out of what you've got, I think that's a decent hire. It doesn't sort of, it doesn't sort of make you feel a fire, but it could have done much worse, I think, than in that situation.
What I like is, well, I don't like Buckingham getting sacked, but they've timed it pretty well when Rowett's coming in with a nice set of games where if he sets them up correctly, he's going to start winning points. Cardiff at home, Plymouth at home, Mill away. They've then got the double of Preston and Plymouth. That's a nice set of games to on paper to get a few results, build some confidence, establish a new way of playing. Um, that double of Preston and Plymouth, it is away, and obviously it's hard to because Rowett didn't take the team against Oxford against Plymouth, but we are going to have 3 game weeks before that. We're going to see 3 lineups. Is there any interest of Oxford in this double? Because we know what Rowett's going to do. He's going to sort them out defensively. Is it? Do you think it's are Oxford a decent option for say follow the leader in the double?
I think it remains to be seen. I think it's possible, but I think it's one where I'm still wary with them. Um, But there's some potential options there. I know Greg Lee's got a couple of attacking returns as a defender. Particularly if he solidifies things up at all, that could be reasonable. We've seen Goodrum return. We know what like sort of player Brannigan can be. That sort of thing. There might be just enough. People, particularly around things like Jeepers Keepers, have had some great returns from Jamie Cumming this season. Like there might be just enough around them to for follow the leader, particularly if they look more solid. I think would be the big thing. Um, yeah, it's the prospect of going to 3 Oxford is one where you're sort of like, do I really want to do this? But like you say, the double, at least on paper, is a pretty good double, and so it's another one where it's like if you're looking outside the box, if you're looking at who simply has the best doubles, Um, you know, Oxford, I'm not going to say could be on the cards, but they might sort of be the one where even if it's not for follow the leader, even if it's just like I'm going to get sort of one or two in for the double, um, it might reach that point. Particularly, like I say, someone like Greg Lee, I think it's 4.6, where it's just like get him in, have him for a couple of these game weeks. He's someone you can easily bench otherwise, etc. So yeah, interesting one. I think it's still very much like to be confirmed for me, though. I think is the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I thought we'd mention it as they were a double. Um, yeah, so that's my 2 games, your 2 games. Any news you wanted to talk about throughout the week, Angus?
Um, so I think there's a couple of games that obviously there's sort of talking points from. First one I'm going to talk about is Sheffield Wednesday 2, Stoke nil. Um, 10-man Sheffield Wednesday getting the win. Um, Bichon Bernard, I don't know what he's doing. First challenge on another day could have been given a red, straight red. It didn't even feel that long before he made a similar challenge that was like stonewalled second yellow, um, uh, which is just bizarre. Um, then you have sort of Josh Windass get the opener. Like good near post run, and I'm not quite sure how the ball ended up sort of going in off him, but it did. And then the second goal again, sort of near post move, I think, for Callum Paterson, who I'd forgotten was still there. Uh,
He shows up for like 2 games a season, then he pops up.
You also had the penalty save. Um,
Yeah,
Weird sequence though. They had a penalty shout turned down that was an absolute stonewaller for a handball by Barry Bannon. Don't know how that doesn't get given. I'm not even sure what they've been like. As in, I know literally what they've been given, but watching it, I'm not sure how they've decided the one that they've given is a penalty, unless it was sort of like they were waiting to give anything because they realised they'd screwed up the first one. Um, James Beadle saves it anyway. It's a really poor penalty from Tom Cannon. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's just Sheffield Wednesday picking up a couple of results at the right time. I've had Marvin Johnson, who's actually ticked along very nicely for me since I brought him in. Um, they're up to ninth, Sheffield Wednesday. And I think, I'm not sort of saying, oh, yeah, they're going to make the playoffs, but I think before the season, I sort of said with them, they felt like the sort of team for me that would be in and around that. And if there were sort of slip ups from teams or teams weren't quite as good above them or whatever, that they could sneak into the playoffs. They've now got to a point where they're 3 points off the playoff
yeah,
places. They've survived a couple of managerial openings where, in terms of Danny Roll being linked with them but not leaving. Now, obviously, that can continue to happen throughout the season, but I think the longer he stays there, the more they have a chance of sort of challenging at this. And I'm not suggesting people sort of go out and pile into Sheffield Wednesday assets, but they I think they're still viable to look at, particularly at the moment, particularly defensively. And I know some people have had a couple of people have had Jan Valery. I think Valerie and Marvin Johnson are both, it's not the worst idea. They will tick over. I can tell you from the points I've had from Marvin Johnson that there are points that tick over in there. You can do worse than that. Um, and so yeah, I think they're interested. Stoke obviously struggling at the moment. They've had absences. I think there's a couple more in this game which haven't helped. But looking at getting a few players back, I think in theory Sam Gallagher should help. Like they'll start to get a couple more players back into the team. Um, Obviously, it's not great for them at the moment in terms of being down the table. We'll see how they go coming up. Um, they play Leeds, then they play Sunderland, although both of those games at home. Then they go to Burnley. That's their next three before they play Plymouth. So um, interesting to see how they go. Um, but it's more so for me about Sheffield Wednesday. And just I think they're a potentially interesting one, particularly if you do run into sort of defensive issues with anyone. They're around that 5 million mark, and I think there's as I say, I think you could do much worse at the moment than them.
going to mention QPR because I think QPR sneakily gone on a bit of a run. They're seven unbeaten, and in that time they've only conceded three goals. And when Cifuentes come in last season, he sorted them out defensively. They obviously tried to adapt a bit at the start of the season, and it wasn't working. They now seem to have gone back to what they were doing, and they're keeping clean sheets. They're starting to score goals. Um, the youngster Colley's come in and scored a few recently. Um, yeah, I just thought I've had Nardi in goals, and he's just been ticking along
Yeah,
great, to be honest. Um, but yeah, I thought I'd mention that they're another one of these teams that are, I'd say, on the charge, but QPR are now 14, and yeah, they're looking like a solid mid-table side now.
yeah. I mean, it all comes back around. Sort of immediately reminded of sort of last season when I did the whole thing about QPR's particularly defensive numbers, and it feels like we're sort of back to that now. A couple of cheaper options doing okay at the moment. You've got Collie. I think he looks like, I know Chris Hermitage feels this way. He looks a little bit more like, okay, he might be an option in home games. Um, which is something interesting to bear in mind, but makes sense, I think. And Smith, I think, has chipped in with a couple of returns as well. But I think, you'd probably be looking defensively again with them, you know, Nardi, Jimmy Dunn, that sort of thing, um, with them.
We have to mention Steve Cook, bless him, getting injured when he was chasing back and a smite runs through
Yeah,
and scores the goal. I mean, I don't see any problem with it, to be honest. I know there was a bit of a hoo ha on X. So I just thought it
yeah,
was fun.
yeah. It's just unfortunate, but that's, the way it
Yeah.
is. But yeah, I think they're certainly an interesting one to keep an eye on at this point as well. And like saying another one, talking about with Sheffield Wednesday, another one with QPR where it's just like if you have a defensive issue crop up, they're another one to potentially look at this point. Um, the last one I'm going to mention is just because it's where I'm going for goal of the week, and it's not necessarily the best goal, but give me a last minute winner anytime just to sort of talk about it. Unfortunately, there weren't enough people to really have a full limb situation, but Millwall getting a winner in the 96th minute, um, from Mihailo Ivanovic, who I think they brought in and had some hopes for. He then got an injury for a bit. I think he broke his hand or something.
He's
Um,
their record transfer.
yeah, he broke his hand or something like that and was out for a little while. Gets his head on it into the far corner. It's not necessarily the best goal, although it's a very Millwall goal. Um, but it was more just, give me that moment, a 96th minute winner. Um, you know, no matter who it is, like it's always entertaining to see. So I just thought I'd mention that in terms of sort of giving that goal of the week. Um, but yeah, I think that's mostly it for me and talking about these games. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, Dan.
No, I think we've covered most of them.
So we'll get into the questions. We've had a few questions. Thank you to those who sent them in. We've had 4 questions this week. I'll start with Chris Hermitage, just mentioned him. He said, how badly will Leeds troll managers when we play boosts? So I think that's happened to a few people this week, as you mentioned. But how badly do you think Leeds will troll managers when people play boosts?
I mean, it could definitely happen. Everyone's on about trying to triple up on Oxford, and Leeds are away to Hull. Although the brick was back at Hull, so
Yeah, I forgot to mention the brick, the sponsors brick. They don't lose when the brick is there. Why they hadn't just got the brick to turn up before now, I don't know. But
I'd get him travelling around the country
yeah,
as well. Get him on the team bus.
but the brick was back and they won. So yeah, maybe it's a more difficult game now.
I mean, they could easily like yeah, come back to haunt you. Like I wouldn't be surprised if people just put Leeds as their third triple on that week.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised.
And I think that's one of those things where both follow the leader and triple. I wonder whether people will get to a point where they start sort of factoring in some of the leads issues to who they go with.
Yeah,
So are you going to put an armband on Nonto with some of the rotation? Do you go someone safer like Aronson or Dan James? Do you just go with Jaden Bogle? Um, I think that's probably more the factor of like, do you reach the point where it's like, right, I'm going to try as much as possible to get like the safest options in my team, which isn't the worst approach, but it's just I wonder whether that will ultimately be the way that um, it goes into the boosts. Um, so yeah, I think that might end up being part of it with Leeds. Rob Pick has asked, as a Johansson owner, time to move on to pairs for the doubles or Cooper? He said, duh. Given they conceded 2 goals to a team of wankers with 10 men. Cheers. Um, so if you are looking to shift Johansson at the moment, where would you go?
Probably pairs. They've got the double coming up, haven't they? Um, I think they went on before they conceded Millwall. It went on a number of games without conceding as well.
Yeah,
So I think
it
pairs.
it was something like 8 games they hadn't conceded or something silly like that. I'm just gonna check it now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 um, without conceding, and that was playing Middlesbrough, Leeds, Hull, Sheffield Wednesday, and Luton. Ironically, like they didn't concede to any of those. They did concede to Cardiff though. Uh, so, um, but yeah, I think there's an argument for pairs. I still think there's an argument for a sneaky one for whether it's sort of Jamie coming with the fixtures coming up. I think that's a sneaky one for me. But yeah, I can understand both with Cooper, although not necessarily the best run on paper coming up, even though they don't concede many. But pairs, yeah, is the other option, I think. But yeah, I'm going to throw Jamie coming out there. Um, Non-stop FPL has asked, yeah, they have 6 defensive assets from Burnley and Sheffield United. Don't ask. Reckon it'll be high or low scoring. Well, I was absolutely convinced it was going to be low scoring after hearing that. Uh, no, I still think it's going to be low scoring. Um,
Yeah.
what do you
Although when
think?
it couple of years ago, I don't know if this was like the same, but Sheffield United did hammer Burnley one game.
Yes,
It
was
was
it
on. Was it on
Follow the
Follow the
Leader?
Lead? Yeah, it
The
was.
the
Oh,
Ndiaye McBurney Ahmed Hodzic.
basically, every corner Sheffield United looked like they were going to score from,
I can't
and
remember who
then
it was. Like everyone had piled into like 3 or 4 or 5 players. And I think there were like 3 that you needed to have, and if you had one of the others, you were just like screwed.
wasn't their second game like really easy
They
on
lost it. They
paper?
lost
They
to
drew.
Rotherham. They lost 1-0 to Rotherham.
Well, they lost to yeah, because
Yeah,
we were like, oh,
and everyone was sort of like they'd got all these points from the Burnley game, and now it was like, and now we've got the Rotherham game, and they went and lost 1-0 to Rotherham.
to be honest, I don't mind having 6 defensive
Yeah,
options from Burnley.
absolutely.
If they've had that for a while, that
Yeah,
sounds like a great idea.
yeah,
As long as one of
absolutely.
them hasn't been Pires.
Yeah, that's true. Um, and Jason's Blades are Blackburn players a genuine option for follow the leader for their double in 26? I think they have to be. They're probably the best team with a double. I know that the Burnley game isn't great, but they've got 2 home games, Burnley home and Portsmouth home. They've got decent options in the team. Um, so I think they're certainly an option. Whether you really want to go with them or decide to do something else is a different matter, but I think they are an option. I sort of hinted at it before. It's come out today that Harry Pickering is out for 2 to 3 months. So obviously Beck for a couple of these games has played left wing, which is obviously now going to go away. But he is now going to play the vast majority of games, and so I think his stock certainly just went up.
Yeah,
Um, you've got Cantwell, you've got Cozier Dubry, you've got the likes of Britton and Hyam. Um,
Pairs.
Pears is obviously one. Um, Ohashi or Gay in sort of attack, but I think there's a few options there. Particularly if you had something like Pears and Beck, and then maybe you go one attacker, something like that, whether it's a Cozy Dubry, a Campwell, like a Gay, that sort of thing. But I do think they are certainly to be considered. I think for me going into the double.
Yeah, the fixtures are a bit mixed. They've got Sunderland and Hull at home, which they've been very good at home. Leeds away in 25, so it's a bit tricky if you're planning for a follow leader. I suppose you could bench them. And then the double is but 2 home games, Burnley, which is obviously a derby, so it would be interesting. And then obviously the one where you would think everyone would be targeting is Portsmouth at home. So yeah, I think Blackburn are, along with Watford, are probably the two teams to target and follow the leader. Um, the third one, God knows who you're going to pick.
I just thought, was it didn't someone get sent off for Blackburn in the Burnley game earlier in the season? Gay
Yeah,
got sent
Beck.
off. Gay got sent off.
Oh,
Beck was against Preston.
oh, yeah,
Gay got sent off. It was a head to head. I want to say was involved. I might be wrong. It was either that or a lunging
yeah,
challenge. I can't remember
because
which one it was.
Vyman scored that
Yes.
absolute worldie, didn't he?
Yeah. Um. But yeah. So maybe that's something to bear in mind. Maybe that's nothing. But um. Yeah. I think they are sort of viable. Whether you can decide not to go with them or whatever. Like whether you really like sort of the games for whether it's Sheffield United or Leeds or whoever.
Yeah,
But I think they are sort of an option, certainly. So I think that's all the questions we've had. I think we've covered quite a bit there. Hopefully that's sort of useful for people. Um, we will be back at some point. Um, not going to make any commitments at this point because I haven't exactly looked at how the fixtures map out, and we haven't sort of discussed things like what sort of abilities to pod we have over the sort of Christmas and New Year period. So we'll work that out and certainly be back with you at some point. We've obviously got the Boxing Day games, and then I think it's Saturday. Um, and I think it might be a full 12 games on Saturday as well, or Sunday. I think it's Sunday.
Sunday,
Sun
Thursday. Is it Thursday,
Thursday, Sunday.
Sunday, New
12
Year's
12
Day,
games Thursday, 12 games Sunday.
12 games New Year's Day,
Yeah.
and then 26. Round 26 is, it looks Saturday, but you've also got some on Sunday and one
Yeah,
on
then it's sort of a more normal weekend.
Monday.
But yeah, so that'll be fun. But as I say, we'll work out somewhere in there we can get you something and but yeah, hopefully this has been useful. If you have any sort of further questions or this has sparked anything in your mind, do shout and we'll do our best to answer them. And yeah, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Goodbye.